Hi, this is Richard. We're going to be talking about doing UV unwrapping. So I've mentioned it a few times through a few different videos. When we've been applying materials, we've just done really simplistic things with materials. We haven't done any UV unwrapping, and it's a critical part, and it is kind of a monotonous part. It's not my favorite thing in the world. Maybe that's why I haven't done this video yet. So we're just going to take something that we've modeled, or maybe something that someone else has modeled, like that monkey's head, Suzanne. And it's kind of the Blender mascot. I think they need a new mascot because look at this guy poking through here. It's not the greatest example of topology, and if you watch my topology video, you would know why. There's a bunch of corners coming together right here that aren't going to shade well. And yes, maybe it's mostly all quads. The triangles are just right here in the center of the eyes. Just going to make those shade weird, and you're going to spend a lot of time focusing on those. This is a very pointy quad in here in the ear, and they're all different sizes. Then this loop just ends right there and loops all the way around and comes back up here. It's just not great topology. I should have used this as an example. It wouldn't have made the Blender people too very happy, though. I just wanted to point that out as an addendum to the things in that other video, but that's not the point here. The point is UV unwrapping. So let's select all of it, and what I've shown you before is you select everything, you hit U and unwrap. What did that do? Well, let's go over here to UV editing. Whoops, I clicked on scripting. UV editing, there we go. And I'm just going to hide some of these things, and I'm going to change up my windows a little bit here so that we can leave this one rendered. You can start seeing some problems that we'll run into. We just did the basic unwrap, and you can see there's an eye, this is maybe the mouth area, this is the back of the head, here's the eyeballs. I don't really see the ears in here, they might be overlapping. So let's drag this up, because we're also going to need our node editor for adding materials in here. So we've got a really weird UV map that we just unwrapped. And let's try, there's another way to unwrap. Let's hit U and do Smart UV Project. And just hit OK, that's fine. It breaks it down into all these little pieces. But first, just to show you the difference of those, let's just do unwrap. There, now we have unwrap. And let's add a new material. And it's just a diffuse, so let's do add an image texture. And we're just going to open up, how about burlap? Just to have a basic pattern. And now you can see the problem with just basic unwrapping and why we need to spend a little bit of time doing UV unwrapping. It's all blurry because it's so huge stretched across Suzanne's upper lip, and then it's all tiny here because that part of the head is really huge as a UV map, so it scales the image down, and this part's really small, so it scales the image up because it's mapping out. Each one of these is a polygon, and that's relational to this. So if we show this as a background, you can see it's taking this section of this image and sticking it on to Suzanne. See, like back here on her head. And we can actually see which one this is if we highlight it here. Oh, that polygon's right there. See how it's really big? It takes all this area and squishes it down really small right there on the eye. Let's turn this around and we can see right here is where that is. The texture is so tiny it's even hard to see that there is a texture on there. And then if we come in here to some of these really small ones, like what about this one? Where is that? Let's find it on Suzanne. Oh, it's right there. It's around her eye on this side. Yup, and you can tell it's got maybe one little weave of this burlap sack right there on that huge area of her face. Maybe right there. And that's why, doing some of these standard things, you can have some problems. So let's try a different way. Let's do U Smart UV Project, or Smart UV Project. And look at that. It did a lot better by breaking her head up into little pieces. And lots of times you can use that because it'll do this based on different seams, and it's pretty smart. But there are reasons and times that you wouldn't want to. See, it got much better. It's still a little stretched in here, but it looks like it all connects pretty well. It's hard to really see the seams where it connects these pieces together. And you can think of this kind of like when people make dresses, they have the patterns for the dresses, and they look like this. It's like a piece of cloth that's been cut so that it can lay flat from a sheet of fabric. And this is basically your sheet of fabric. And these are called islands. And they're cut off of this sheet and then wrapped around your 3D object. So, how can we tell it where to cut this? That's by making seams. You can make your own layout. So let's go in here, full screen. I'm just hitting Shift Space. Let me turn this on so you can see what I'm clicking. Okay, now we've got Suzanne. Let's deselect all of her and turn that off. Alright, now we want her face. Let's grab a whole ring around her face. We're going to Control E and mark that as a seam that we're going to cut for our UV mapping. So it's going to cut that and try and lay it flat. Well, it might have a problem right here where it stretches it, so we'll just add those in. Whoops. Control E, mark seam, so that it can help it lay flat. We might add these in here as well. Just you have to think about if you had this shape printed out on printer paper, how would you have to cut it to make it lay flat? And then we're gonna cut off one of her ears. Go all the way around it, like that. Mark that as a seam. And then you want to hide these seams anywhere you can, because it's actually going to try to put this together on these seams. So that's where you might run into some problems. And we're going to have to cut that mostly in half. That's probably good. And then we might want to cut out the inside of her ear. Goodness, they could have done a better job on Suzanne, but oh well. Whoops. Mark seam. And then we'll probably need, let's just attach this here. And then we would have to do it to this other side as well. So let's do this real quick. And now we've got our face, and then you might want to come around here and do more. And this is a good time when edge select might be more appropriate. And then we'll want to take a look at, we'll probably have to add some more, whoops. Probably have to add some more in there on the head. But for now, select all and hit U, unwrap. See, now we have some islands that are laid flat. And that stretching is much less in here on the face where you're going to notice it. That's the first thing that we notice right off. And because there's no seams for creating islands anywhere on this face, it's not deforming it in those places or pinching it or putting it together where it doesn't quite fit. And you can see here it does get a little small back here because the head, we didn't add many seams in, so it's not too very stretched. And then look right here where it comes together, I added my seam. The pattern doesn't quite meet up, but because that's not a very highly noticeable place, it's going to be forgiven pretty quickly and forgotten about. Especially where the ears attach. Let's just make this big. You can see how the pattern changes, and you can move your islands to try and match that up better. But you have a more uniform shape and size. The back of the head is still really stretched out, so we might want to add some more seams there or change our islands around. And what am I talking about? Well, let's take a look. Let's look at this one right here. And let's find where that is. Oh, that's the underside. So you can just switch this and let's select these here. See how they're really small? Let's go over and turn on proportional editing. And let's just scale those up. Whoop, my proportional editing balloon is way too big, so let's scroll that in. And let's make those a little bit more proportional. Now if we look back here, watch. You can see that texture getting smaller or bigger as we scale this up or down. We might just tweak it just a little bit to try and make it more the same size. And that's a bit better. But now it's stretching it out here on the forehead. And that's a bit worse. So we'll come over here. We'll select those and we'll just scale those just a little bit. And it's looking pretty good. I mean, we can make the eyeballs a little bit different, like the interior of the eyes. We probably should have separated that out. See how it's now overlapped. So we can go onto the eyeball and let's switch it to edge. Select that and let's do that. Add a line right there where it can be cut. And Control E, mark those seams. Now this is going to undo the scaling that I did right here, which is why I suggest doing the scaling last, but do all your seams first. That's why we might want to go in here and change these seams. And if you'll notice, another reason why this is bad topology is because these quads really should be smaller. Look back here, you see this is divided into two triangles when really it's just one quad. Bad topology. Oh, that's not good. You should add more polygons in there to smooth that out if you want that shape. So, let's take Suzanne and sometimes just doing a little bit of this will allow it to lay a bit flatter. Well, it's pushed together, so those seams didn't really matter. You just kind of got to play with where you're going to put your seams to unwrap things. And then these are your islands. And if you wanted to paint on this for textures, you can export this as an image. There is a way to paint in this, but that's a completely different video. So I'm just going to show you here how to UVs, export UV layout. And it's going to take this, and it's going to save it wherever you specify. Let's just stick it in UV. Let's do Suzanne.png. And it exported that. Now I can open up GIMP and I can file, open, and go to, where do I have it? Where did I save it? Under models. Oh, there's UV. Okay, we'll go to Suzanne, open that up, and now you see I have a PNG file with an alpha channel that I can just start. You want to go here to layers and add a new layer. And then you can just start, if you have it selected, painting on this to change the texture. And then you'll just export this with that one turned off. And then you can overlay it. Now let's go look at how we overlay it. We just go back in here to texture and change that, and it would put it right on there. You don't want to change this because then you'd have to go and change your image. So you want to do all of this UV mapping first. You want to get your islands how you want them so that things aren't looking weird. And you can just use a basic texture or basic images to do that at first. And once you get better at it, you'll have a better feel for it. What happened to those eyes? I thought I marked those. There we go. Now those eyes look better. And then you can also add different images for these different UV maps. If we want all of her to be this part, but then we want, let's say, just the eyes to be a different one. This image behind this is just as a reference to show how these are going to be laid over the image if you're using an image. So we can close that one out, and it's not going to change her. See? She's still the same even though there's nothing showing here. It's whatever you put down here. This was just used to lay out your UV map. And that does matter how it's laid out. So let's go to open. Oh, let's make her eyes. I don't know, red brick. Why not? Let's go ahead and keep with making it look awful. And then we're going to add a new material down here. So this is material 2. We're going to add an image texture. And if you can make these as complex as you want using the same UV map, that's in the materials video that I did, that you can really layer these images and make it as realistic as you want. Oh, well now it changed everything. So what we need to do is let's get out of here and go back to default. And now when we go to materials, you should see that there's one slot here, not two. So let's add another slot. And let's make this one material 1, that's the burlap. We can hit preview just to make sure that you can see it. And the eyes are already the brick, so let's Control I to invert our selection, choose the burlap, and assign. And it's going to assign that based on the UV map that we have. So we can go back here to UV editing. Now you can see that. And one note that I want to make before we finish this up, this is a really brief overview of how to do UV mapping in this way. You can, let's switch this and hit this button here. Keep UV and then switch it to edit mode. So now you can select things and they're not linked to each other. So we'll just hit L there, Shift L there to select those. We can scale these up. But now look how they're overlapping. That's okay in Blender, that's not a problem. But if you want to take this to a game engine, you cannot overlap these UV maps. So you have to be careful where you place your seams so that they're not self-overlapping. And then you also have to be careful where you put these different elements, because you are not allowed to overlap in most game engines. So we can do this and we can change. You see I scale these up and it changes the size of the bricks in her eyes. And that's pretty much it for UV mapping. Just a real quick overview because I don't want to get into the advanced stuff with it just yet since this is still intermediate. This should give you some ideas how to do things. Now let's go ahead and let's just delete Suzanne. Goodbye. And let's put in a sphere because spheres are hard to work with. Let's just hit U, unwrap. And all right. Well, Let's try that again. There we go. It overlaid all of those on top of itself. So now if we do a material, well, let's just choose one. Let's just choose the brick. It's going to try and connect those, and it does an okay job of it. And then we can go back to, oh, let's just do it here. We can go to shading and smooth. And it does okay. It really tries to match everything, but they're all overlaid, so you can't use this in a video game at all. We can, which one is it? Control P? Hit Control P and it'll try to lay everything out, all of the different parts side by side, so that there's nothing overlapping. Just hitting Control P. And then Control A will try, it's going to try its best to rotate everything, make it match up. It didn't quite though, did it? Yep, it's not making all that line up. So what do you do with a sphere? Well, you can hit U and go down here to sphere projection, and it's going to unlay it flat, kind of like a map, and that works pretty well. There are a few places where it doesn't. See, like at these points where everything comes together, it gets pretty weird. You can have some problems, but for the most part, it does pretty good. I mean, it's a pretty nice brick texture on a sphere, honestly. But then how do we get the top looking really good? Well, you can just select like this top where it's pretty easy to lay it flat. So we've got 1, 2, 3rd ring down. 1, 2, 3rd. We'll select both of those and we'll just Control E and mark the seam. And then let's just select one of those edge loops and Control E, mark that seam. And unwrap it. Now we have something a little more flat, and it doesn't look the best, but you can try and get it to line up with Control P, and you got a seam in the back. If you're just looking at this for a render, you can rotate this just like normal. If you're just looking at this for a render, that might be good enough, especially if you're doing like the globe. You can get a North Pole shot and a South Pole shot, and then you can get pretty much a map and put it on here, and you'll just have a little bit of trouble back here where it connects, and then you can just scale this down a little bit. Scale on the X or Y. There we go. See how that scales back up, down on that seam. You can just do that a little bit until it matches. That's generally a pretty good way to take a flat texture and wrap it around a sphere, because it's more like a map and a North Pole, South Pole that you can overlay onto an image. So generally that's a pretty good idea. You don't even have to really have these on the circles, these seams here. We can just, whoops, Control E, clear those seams, and unwrap it again, and now there's spheres. And that even makes that look even crisper and better. And that's what I would recommend for doing spheres. UV unwrapping, it's a skill to be learned, and it's something that's going to take up a lot of your time. If you want to really get your materials looking as realistic as possible, it's something you're going to need to practice. And hopefully I've given you enough of a start so that you can start practicing and make some things that are a lot more complex than what I've shown you before. If you have any questions, please post them in the comments. Of course, I'm going to be watching there, answering any of your questions. If you need immediate help where you want to ask a series of questions or go over a few things and have me show you some stuff, then of course tune into Beginner Blender Live, which I'm going to be doing every Saturday at 3 p.m. Central Time. You can ask any questions you want and I'll answer them while I'm modeling something pretty basic. So that's a great way to continue your education with Blender and get some answers to some of those harder to ask questions where maybe you don't know how to ask it. If you have something like that where you kind of know what you want to do, but you don't even know how to ask a question, it's a great way for you to get an answer to those questions. Alright, I hope to see you in the next video, and I hope you learned a lot.